May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Please be seated. Epiphany tide, which we have now entered, is a season both of celebration and of revelation. During the 5 weeks before Lent, we play a form of I Spy with God, seasoning ourselves in the practice of God sighting, of being on the lookout for theophany. A theophany is a divine self-revelation, an inbreaking of God. The Bible reports lots of theophanies, and Epiphany is a season that is rich with them. So first, on January 6th, which was Epiphany proper, Jesus revealed himself as an infant to the Gentiles when the Magi from the east came to worship him in a stable. In the readings we share on each subsequent Sunday in Epiphany tide, the divine in Jesus glimmers yet more strongly, becoming more and more manifest to the human eye. Jesus' miracles, as his active ministry later unfolds, are like little epiphanies. They tell us something about God in the world and a way of being in the world that Christ has come to create on earth for all of us to follow. Last week, in the lesson for First Sunday after Epiphany, which was last week when Richard preached, Jesus revealed himself as a divine doctor, healing the body and forgiving the sins of a paraplegic who was lowered down from the ceiling. In another miracle, in the Epiphany miracle at Jesus' baptism, we hear, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased," and God reveals himself through Jesus. In some traditions during Epiphany, the miracle of the loaves and fishes to feed 5,000 people is also remembered and is a clue to a part of Epiphany, to God's self-revelation. And then the arc of self-revelation, of God's self-revelation, bends toward the final Sunday in Epiphany, the Transfiguration, when Jesus and 3 disciples climb to the top of a high mountain. And there again a cloud will descend. Jesus will burn with an unworldly white light. And God will exclaim to the fearful Peter, James, and John, "This is my Son, whom I have chosen. Listen to him." So now we're all moving toward that big, extravagant Epiphany. I think, however, many people's favorite Epiphany miracle is the wedding at Cana. It's the one that many people remember. During that wedding, as part of that miracle, Jesus transforms large casks of water into wine, into red wine, because the partiers, the dancers, the people who are celebrating have run out of wine. And I like this story because it shows the joy Jesus takes in human celebration. It says, "Let us dance in the presence of each other, and let us dance for the love God showered upon us." And I can hear Jesus feeling this, thinking this, when he turns the water into wine. It's in the Gospel of John, so it also points to a lot of other things, like the red wine that we drink and Jesus' blood that he will shed. But right there at the beginning, it's about celebration. It's about Jesus revealing God's self to us. For many people, however, dancing, especially when it's in a holy place, can be unseemly. even kind of unholy. When I was a child, my parents would drag us the weekend before Christmas to a large party at which the host, his family, and friends played music on a fiddle, and they sang Christmas songs. For me, the occasion was both exciting and harrowing. Exciting because our host served a spiced glögg that my sisters and I would sneak cups of while my parents were singing. It was very tasty. Harrowing because this was no ordinary sing-along. Many of the singers took part in a DC musical tradition called the Christmas Revels, and there were some people with very good voices, very beautiful voices, trained voices. And there was one man who sang every year. He got up and he sang, "I am the Lord of the dance." And this was when my sisters and I began to look the other way. Because at that point, as soon as he stood up, my parents also stood up. And they began to wiggle their hips, and they began to dance like all get out. Only if you have been a teenage child of exhibitionist parents, can you imagine the horror that washed over us at the opening strands of "I danced in the morning when the world was begun." There were my father's dancing, lifting his shoulders up and down, which was kind of how he danced. And there was my mother pummeling the sky. And then there was me going like this. Harrowing. Didn't my parents know they were not supposed to move their bodies that way, especially when dressed up for Christmas? So, I imagine this is rather the reaction at the flouting of norms that the Pharisees had when they saw Jesus traipsing through the fields of grain on the Sabbath, pulling at the grains in the fields, or pulling up to a meal and a cup of wine with sinners and tax collectors. Doesn't this supposed teacher and healer know that the law calls us to honor the Sabbath by abstaining from work? I imagine them saying to themselves. Doesn't he know that you're supposed to fast in times of mourning to keep away from pariahs such as the tax collector Levi? How can Jesus not only defy the law, but make such an exhibitionist of himself? I can almost see Jesus sort of doing this, right? Jesus responds to their criticism by saying, now is not the time for fasting. Jesus compares himself to the groom at a wedding, whom he can easily see dancing in joy for his marriage. In Jesus' case, his marriage is with humanity. Humanity is his bride. And their marriage ushers in a new era of love and reconciliation. Likewise, Jesus invites himself to a feast at the house of Levi, the tax collector. Jewish tax collectors colluded with Roman authorities and profited at their neighbors' expense. They were called sinners. But in biblical Israel, a sinner could also be a label for a nonconformist. Someone who didn't behave the way we wanted them to behave. Someone who didn't adhere to religious requirements or social expectations for Jews. That could also be a sinner. So Jesus goes out of his way to listen to these people, these sinners, these tax collectors, these people who are all collected together and who are sort of the pariahs, the people who are out of society, and he sits down and he listens to them. He listens to them with an open and a curious heart. And now, here we are in Epiphany, with theodicies cropping up all around us. And how do we respond to these stories? How do we respond to people who are different from us, who are posting something different online from what really we would like to see them posting? How do we respond when we hear for the call of the healing of desperate cases, for the loving of these people? Like the disciples, we might ask, how do we listen? How do we adjust our thinking and our behavior? If we listen, we hear in these Epiphany stories God breaking into history to show us the meaning of the good news. And we notice that if we only open ourselves to the possibilities and the grace that is offered, God takes residence in us too. We become our own theophanies. The light of God is bright white within us. Like Jesus, we are called to feed, to heal, to forgive, and to work toward creating on earth a heavenly realm of love and compassion. In the words of Martin Luther King, Jr., whom we celebrate tomorrow, we are called on to create a beloved community. And God comforts us all as we rise to work on these imperatives, telling us all, you are my beloved. Amen.